Hello and welcome to another Hand Drink Solo wine info video, and today we're talking about the cultivar of Cinsaut through the lens of the Mount Abora Safraan Cinsaut, made by the enigmatic winemaker Kirge Visser. Traditionally at Hand Drink Solo we take a rather scientific approach to the wines that we showcase, but in this particular instance it would seem absolutely incongruous to look at this wine through any lens other than a poetic one, because winemaker Kirge Visser is deeply steeped in the art of poetry, and it's out of that he's inspired to make wine. However, I will say, if you do enjoy geeky wine content and wine science and history and winemaking trends, then you definitely should subscribe to the Hand Drink Solo YouTube channel, and you should also give us a like, because it'll help more people like you to find our content. The project of Mount Abora Wines is a collaboration between winemaker Kirge Visser and his business partner Pieter de Waal. And the way Kirge explains it is that Kirge, is the intuitive partner, whereas Pieter is the voice of reason. You should also note that Pieter de Waal is an incredibly gifted wine taster and a regular feature in the top 10 of the South African Blind Wine Tasting Championships. The name Mount Abora comes from the legendary poem by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Kubla. And we'll talk more about that in a bit, but you should know that the very first vintage of Safraan was in 2012, and it came about in a decade that was marked by absolutely unparalleled rediscovery of Cinsaut as a cultivar of quality, which is something it certainly hadn't been thought of in the past. Now, we've spoken about the history of Cinsaut in South Africa in other places where it really grew rapidly in post-phylloxera South Africa, when the entire national vineyard had been wiped out and farmers really needed a lot of grapes very quickly, which Cinsaut knew how to provide. But it was chosen more out of pragmatism, not out of some love for the sensory quality that Cinsaut can deliver. In fact, quality was probably one of the last things on people's minds. But what has been amazing to watch unfold is how since the 1900s, we've seen those Cinsaut vineyards get older and older. And as their yields drop, the wines they produce get more concentrated and more structured, which is why these winemakers in the Swartland, Kirge being one of them, turned their attention to Cinsaut as single cultivar wine, which largely the rest of the world had ignored, with the exception of maybe Lebanon and Chile. And so these wines triggered a wave of newfound appreciation around the globe. And really it was these South African winemakers that was the inspiration for this newfound pleasure. Kirge's personal journey to Cinsaut as a cultivar was weirdly triggered by a cultivar called Pinot Donis, which he drank in the Loire. And what he realized about this was that the lightness and luminescence of the wines that were made from Pinot Donis proved to him that wine does not need to be big and bolshy and tannic in order to be epic. So he then spent the next 10 years working with Pinot Noir in Walker Bay, which was a fairly fledgling industry at the time. And it was only after that he finally crossed paths with some of the young soldiers of the Swartland Revolution. And they believed that Cinsaut could be the Pinot Noir of the Swartland. Although, ironically, some of those original young revolutionary soldiers have now realized that Cinsaut can't be the Pinot Noir of the Swartland, and have actually decided to plant actual Pinot Noir on some weirdly very high-lying cold vineyards in the Swartland. But that is a story for another day. Anyway, it was into this context that the Safraan was born. And this Cinsaut garnered something of a cult status in its early years, which is why there was much wailing and gnashing of teeth when they had to uproot those vineyards and the wine stopped flowing. But now it is back and we are all rejoicing. The only difference is that some of the fruit is taken from the Swartland around Malmesbury, whereas other portions are taken from the Breedekloof. The legend surrounding Kubla goes that Coleridge, in fact, dreamt the entire thing up in a drug-fueled haze. He dreamt 200 to 300 lines worth of poetry, word for word, as he says it. And so he woke up in a state and wanted to write down as much as he possibly could, but he only got 30 lines in before the doorbell rang and he realized that he had a business meeting. By the time he'd finished his business meeting and got back to his desk, the rest of the poem or the memory of it had evaporated. And that's why the second stanza has got a slightly different tone. And actually that second stanza is about trying to get back the vision that he had. Now, in that second stanza, there is the mention of Mount Abora, which is the subject of a song sung by an Abyssinian maiden with a dulcimer. And it might interest you to know that there's actually quite a lot of controversy around what Mount Abora was. What was Coleridge referencing when he wrote Mount Abora? And there is one school of thought that says actually he's referencing Mount Amara, which was mentioned by John Milton in Paradise Lost. And Mount Amara is in what was originally the Abyssinian Empire. But not everyone agrees. Still, I think that's enough conjecture for one day. Let's get into the glass and see what it tastes like. When we give this guy a sniff, man, it is such an explosive nose. I really think if you're serving this in a small glass, go and find a bigger glass. Get the biggest bowl that you can and pour the wine in so that you really can experience this kaleidoscope of pink peppercorn and cranberry and red cherry and red plum. There's also coriander seed and wildflowers. It really is supremely layered in the aromas alone. When we get to give it a sip, well, Luminous is about right. There's such a beautiful mix of cherry fruit, raspberries, pepper spice, and even a little bit of blood orange pith towards the end. And then on the tail, it gets a bit deeper and more savory. And there's kind of herbal, fennel, licorice, and bitter elements, which just reminds you that it's not all cherries and flowers, and the really wine can still mean business. A really lovely example of what a Cinsaut can be. Finally, as one more gift to you, I did ask Kirge if you had to read one single poem apart from Kubla while drinking this wine, what poem should it be? And his answer was Kochelbos by DJ Opperman out of his compilation Kuamas uit the Bamboo Stalk. So there you have it. If you do need something to read along with a glass of Safraan, Kochelbos is the one you should hunt down. So that's all we have time for today, but I have left links to 2 videos which explore some highly unusual Cinsauts and really show how different South African Cinsauts can be from the rest of the world.